Robert Sugden thought he'd finally left his past behind. But just when it seemed like he might rebuild his life, a ghost from his darkest chapter came back to claim him, his secret husband, Kev Townsend. A man who wasn't just unpredictable, he was obsessed. And this time, he wasn't going to let Robert go. The whole village was stunned. No one saw it coming. When Kev arrived, he didn't come quietly. He came with a mission to remind everyone that Robert Sugden wasn't a free man. He was already taken. And to prove it, Kev wanted to renew their wedding vows, publicly, in front of everyone Robert cared about. It was the kind of move that felt less like love and more like possession. To Aaron, it was betrayal in its purest form. The man he loved, the man he thought he knew, had been hiding a marriage that happened behind prison walls. Robert swore it meant nothing, that it was just a desperate act to survive. But that excuse didn't matter anymore, because no matter how he explained it, it still hurt. Aaron had already endured enough heartbreak, and this was one wound too many. But Kev wasn't the kind of man who disappeared quietly. With his health fading and time running out, he moved into Emmerdale determined to spend whatever days he had left with Robert. To him, it wasn't just love, it was control. He wanted everyone to see that Robert belonged to him, even Aaron, especially Aaron. He cornered him once, told him to back off, to leave Robert alone. It wasn't a threat spoken in anger, it was cold, deliberate, and chilling. Caught between guilt and fear, Robert tried to keep everything together. On the outside, he played the part of a loyal husband, but inside, he was falling apart. Because his heart still belonged to Aaron, the one person who had seen every version of him, even the broken one. And yet walking away from Kev wasn't that simple. The man was dying, and Robert stood to inherit a small fortune as his next of kin. That kind of temptation has a way of twisting even the strongest intentions. Still, Kev wanted more than quiet companionship. He wanted a spectacle, a second wedding, one last show of devotion before the end. For him, it was romance. For Robert, it was a nightmare he couldn't escape. Every time Kev mentioned the ceremony, it felt like another chain tightening around his neck. Even Victoria could see it. Every smile Robert forced looked like it hurt. Every time someone mentioned Aaron, his expression shifted just enough for her to notice. She knew her brother wasn't in love. He was trapped, torn between what was right and what he wished could be different. Meanwhile, Kev grew sicker but more determined. He wrote new vows that sounded less like love and more like ownership. To outsiders, it looked touching. To those who knew the truth, it was suffocating. Every word he rehearsed was another reminder that he didn't want a partner, he wanted control. Aaron tried to stay away, but he couldn't ignore the chaos forever. When he finally confronted Robert, it wasn't out of anger, it was out of exhaustion. He told him he wanted no part in the mess anymore, that he was done being caught in the middle of someone else's choices. But before walking away, he left one final warning. He wouldn't take any more threats. He'd had enough of being treated like a pawn in someone else's story. Robert listened, speechless. The guilt on his face said everything words couldn't. He wanted to fix it, but how do you repair something that was broken by lies? Every choice he had made, every secret, had only pulled him deeper into a life he no longer recognized. As the day of the vow renewal crept closer, the pressure became unbearable. Every line of Kev's speech felt like another reminder that Robert had built his own prison. The money didn't matter anymore. The guilt was eating him alive. He couldn't stop thinking about Aaron, about what they could have been if he hadn't made so many mistakes. As the ceremony finally began, the entire village watched. Kev stood there, pale but triumphant, ready to claim what he believed was his. Robert stood beside him, heart pounding, every instinct screaming to run. And then came the question, the moment everyone waited for. Would he say those words again and seal himself to a man he no longer loved, or would he finally break free?
No one knew what Robert would do, but one thing was certain. Whatever choice he made, it would change everything. Because love built on lies can only survive for so long before it collapses. And Robert had been living that collapse for years. Kev's illness may have taken his strength, but it never took his control. Even in his final moments, he wanted to win. But maybe, deep down, he knew that no matter how hard you try, you can't force someone to love you back. As the vows hung in the air, Robert's future stood on a knife's edge. Would he stay bound to a man whose love felt like a cage, or finally walk toward the one person who had always seen him for who he truly was? Because in Emmerdale, nothing ever stays buried for long. Secrets always surface, and the truth, it always finds its way home.